joining us here this evening. For those of you who don't know me, which I think everyone does, but anyone joining us online, my name is Will Akins. I am the Worship and Arts Director, or the Music Director here at Holy Shepherd, and I am so excited to do this one. Not that I wasn't excited to do the last one, but now we're in like my bread and butter wheelhouse. Although it's always, every time I do these things, I never rely on just the memories that I do have. I always find it's a new and exciting opportunity to do more research, find out something new, maybe something that I didn't know, maybe something that I overlooked, because every time I get to the end of these and as soon as I sit down, I go, man, I forgot to say that, or man, this was something that we could have talked about. But the spirituals or the slave song are something that are incredibly, incredibly important to me because it was some of the first music that I heard growing up. Not necessarily because I was a slave, but my great-grandmother was actually the children of slaves. So, and I was lucky and blessed enough to have my great-grandmother here until 2021. So I got to live well into like a good portion of my life and have lots of memories of my great-great-grandmother. And it's interesting how she ended up here in Gary, and some of this is in the newsletter, but long story short, she was born in Mississippi, and when she was a senior in high school, she came up here with her cousin Pat. And Pat was already coming for a trip, and she talked my great-grandmother, whose name was Mamie, into coming on this trip. And somehow someone up here knew that Mamie was coming and had a boy set up for Mamie when she got here. And so the 2 weeks ended. Now it's time to go back to Mississippi. And Pat said, all right, Mamie, let's go. And Mamie said, I'm not going. I found my man. And so she ended up staying here and met my great-grandfather, and then ended up marrying him, who relocated to this area after the war and was in the steel mills. And so they ended up together having 5 children, where my granny was there were 7 altogether. My great-grandfather had 1 in a previous marriage. My great-grandmother had 1 in a previous marriage. Together they had 5. My grandma is number 5 in the line of all 7. And she reminds me all the time that she's still, out of all 6 of her sisters, she's the only one that doesn't have any great-grandchildren. And then she was like, and you all had the nerve to go and get dogs and tell me. I said, it's the same. They're cheaper dates. You just walk them for 15 minutes and then. So, the spiritual or the slave song. So back in the time where the country was still new, was still fresh, things were different. I am not by any means excusing anyone's behavior for things that we can identify are wrong, but I also am not going to be historically try to change what happened then. This is what was going on. And at that time, when you had lots of folks coming from lots of different places, communication and language was the one thing that you had. You had your communication or your food. Those were the only things that could really consistently tie you back to home. And one of the tactics that a lot of different, and there were lots of different kind of tactics to keep the mentality of the slave in a certain way, but one of the things they did was to keep them separated. The more I can keep you separated, and the more I can keep distance from you in certain ways, or make certain people, like one of the first things they would do in a lot of cases when they first started bringing slaves over is they'd get the biggest slave, and they would tie him up, and they would beat him within inches of his life. And then they let him go. Because now I don't have to be the one to put fear in you either. And so one of the first things that were taken was, you can't speak that language. We will change your name. We will give you a different name. We will take your language. And in the taking of the language, that was something that was very important to the African community. There's a phrase that that is said in a lot of different tribes in many different ways, but it translates to I am because we are. It's basically saying that, it takes a village. I am because we are. And if I think of every single point of my history, my great-grandmother coming up here on a trip and meeting a boy and saying, I'm not going back home. Or my great-grandfather relocating this way, and then that, my parents, and then their different family trees. I am because we are. Same thing with you all as my family here. I am because we are. And so when that voice was taken away from them, they found a new way to utilize that voice and to still communicate with each other about a multitude of different things. Slave songs and Negro spirituals were not just songs of oppression. They weren't just songs of, I'm going to sorrowfully sing to Jesus. We also do know that they talked about, certain songs gave us certain codes and certain clues. But some songs were meant just to have communicating language. Some songs were meant to specifically tell you, hey, this is your exit route and this is how you take said exit route. Some songs were other coded messages. So lots of those different things really started to come into play. So instead of talking about the Mississippi River, a lot of times the Mississippi River was referred to as the Jordan River. Or sometimes, depending on where you were, the Jordan River could have also been referring to the Ohio River. It just depended on where you were. Usually if they talked about the Promised Land, they were talking about Canada because it was freedom. It was north. We can reference north. We can reference up. We can talk about the Promised Land. And at the end of the day, if we're out here slaving away, no pun intended, and you are asking us to do things all day long, the least you can do is let us sing. So songs were kind of okay some places. Sometimes they weren't. So sometimes they would wait until they got into their church services. Could you go to the next slide, please, Pastor? So we all know what devotionals are. We've all done devotionals to where you pray or reflect on specific things. But there is a very specific point of the service called devotion. And I know it's a little hard to, it was much bigger on my office wall. I'll read it for you. It said, the deacons, elders, or lay ministers began the gathering of the service singing, praying, reading scripture, and chanting. This part of service was always for everyone, as most songs were call and response or featured a strophic or a very repetitive structure. Many blues stylings were born from this exact style, and I'm going to play you some in a moment. And part of you might even sit there and think, where's the line between we're sitting in a blues house and we're actually sitting in church? As Will plays through a few well-known devotional hymns, ponder these thoughts. Many enslaved African Americans could not read, write, or understand English past which was taught to them, which usually was not much. Many social gatherings were banned against slaves, including for church, funerals, weddings, any of those things. Slave masters and other plantation workers wanted to keep separation and strip them of their unity. This time in the service was how everyone could be included, not just those who could read the Bible. So this was a time to where everyone could sing, because if you came to my hymn sing, remember there was a lot of that back and forth. I say one thing, you say the same thing, I say one thing. So that's what would happen. So usually you'd have someone, you could go to the next slide, please, Pastor. You'd have someone, back in that time, they did not have pianos, obviously, in their church. But as the church started to evolve and these songs started to evolve, they started to put actually rhythm, piano music with it. But back then it would have just been someone stumping and clapping. Jesus is on the main line. Tell him what you want. Jesus is on the main line. Tell him what you want. Jesus is on the main line. Tell him what you want. You just call him up and tell him what you want. So then the congregation would just repeat that, because now someone has given the call and we can all sit back and respond to it. And I don't have to know how to read. I can rely on those elders who maybe don't even read themselves, but maybe they just know because they've sang it before. So I'll sing it for you one more time. Jesus is on the main line. Tell him what you want. Jesus is on the main line. Tell him what you want. Jesus is on obviously the main message being God and your devotion to him, your love for him. That was what the strength of the spiritual was. Those were the devotions that I grew up on. Those were the songs that we didn't start a single church service without someone going up to the front. And you didn't know what song they were going to sing. The hardest part about doing this was picking which ones to limit it down to, because as I kept going, I was like, oh, I remember that one. Oh, I remember that one. And they all fit over the same. You could just sit there and play it all day long. And there were times, if you move past the slavery era into more of the segregation era, into more of like the Jim Crow era, when churches would meet for devotional services and for 2 hours, that's all they would do, is they just get up and they would sing. They would sing because for the African American, that was kind of what is in our ancestry, is whether you look at it from a religious point, which a lot do, a spiritual point, which a lot do, a combination of both, which a lot also do as well. We understood that our troubles and the persecutions and the weight that we were holding was nothing compared to the weight of what Christ had held. And that he had already died for our sins. And if we think about Dr. King, our journey was of that to love. Can you really forgive someone who does these heinous, horrible things? But who are we to judge? That was something my great-grandmother instilled in me. She instilled two things in us. One, your family is everything. Your family is the most important thing, the biggest gift God can give you is your family. And two, we are not fit to judge anyone. Because for every judgment we can cast, how many can be cast back at us? So, with that being said, while the slaves were forgiving, they also didn't want to do it anymore. There also came this quiet strength from these church meetings. When you couldn't actually get married, so the only way that you could showcase that you were getting married was by jumping over a broom, and then you got to hang up that broom in your shack or in your home, and that represented that you two were together. Because sometimes the slaves were treated like property. And what happens if you have too many knives in your cabinet and you know your friend needs knives? You will give your friend some of your knives. Or they might buy them off of you or whatever, but you will just part ways with your knives, not thinking of them coming as a set because they're just knives. And that's just such a crazy thought for us to wrap our heads around as we think about, we're talking about human lives. We're talking about people with families and souls and spirits. And it is something that we talk about especially in the Black and the African American culture, that our ancestors are always with us. That all you have to do is literally say their name with all the purest intention of your heart, and they will be there with you through whatever storm you are walking through. And so sometimes when I need to call on strength, I'll call on my great-grandfather, because that man was very, what he said went. And so sometimes when I need that extra strength, or my Nana, who was a school teacher for 43 years, when I'm just struggling with something mentally and I'm just like, I can't figure this out, Nana, can you help me? And so in a way, that's kind of what they did, and that's how we got to the slave songs, the songs that we kind of more think about when we think of Negro spirituals. So the reason they called it the Underground Railroad was railroads were kind of the newest form of transportation, but it hadn't taken up everywhere yet. So not everyone knew these things. So it was something that, like, some of the coding and some of the words that were used were already kind of figured out. But because it was new, they're not going to know what we're talking about if they happen to catch us saying things. So these are just some of the words, and I can share them with you. I won't read all of them. But these are just some of the words that were actual code words for different things. And they led into the code song. So, like, if you were talking about bundles of wood, those were fugitives that were expected. So I got 5 bundles of wood coming up. You got 5 people that are going to be smothered in that somehow, somewhere. Your conductor was the person who was directly transporting the slaves. So the conductor of the most famous conductor, if you will, Harriet Tubman, Moses, as we will also hear her called later. She was the person who she would come back down to get you. Harriet Tubman multiple times went from being caught, enslaved, ran north, was free, and then she got there and she was like, I gotta go back. And her family was like, what do you mean you have to go? You're free, you don't have to go anywhere. She said, I have to go back. So she did it again. She went back. She didn't drive back. She didn't ride back. She walked back from the north down to the south to get more people and said, hey, we're going to leave this time tomorrow. You got to be ready. And so if you knew that was coming, one of the things she might sing is what they would do sometimes, because there were these big fields, is the one slave that was running, or the conductor, would come and they would start a song from like off in the woods. They like from off on the side. They'd start a song and everyone would sing the song, and they just knew to listen for certain words. They didn't maybe know what the whole song meant. They just knew to listen for certain words, like follow the drinking gourd. That meant follow the North Star. The drinking gourd was the North Star, or the Big Dipper. Because out of every way to position yourself, they knew they wanted to go north. And what's one thing that's always going to point you north? They realized all the stars in the sky moved except that one in the middle. They also started to discover that moss typically grew on the north side of the tree. And so once they started to make those connections, then it became easier for the conductor to track these routes and to go back and forth, and then would start different songs. The gospel train, that was just the Underground Railroad. Heaven was Canada or freedom. Sometimes towards when it got really, really bad, they did mean it in the more deep, dark way of just, I just don't want to do this, even if that means that I go home to my Lord. I'd rather go be with my Lord than be here and continue to endure this. Could you go to the next slide, please? Loaded potatoes, this is one of my favorite. Loaded potatoes is escaping slaves hidden under farm produce in a wagon. So if you got a load of potatoes, that means I got all of my produce hidden on top of it, and it would be, I'm going to go from one section to the next. So, I might need to travel from here to, let's just say, to Lafayette. And I got to get there however I have to get there. And Harriet Tubman, being one of the most well-known conductors, it is also well-known that part of her success rate is she didn't take no mess. If you were going to slow them down, because her goal was to get as many free slaves. And if you weren't with the program at a certain point in time, you will be dead weight, you will weigh us down, and I can't let you go back because you're going to tell them what we said. So those kinds of choices were kind of hard, but it was those choices that really built what the Underground Railroad is, this system of connected, trusted individuals. And then as you got closer north, then you had Quakers that were also helping out. I have been in homes that have actual hideaways. They're actually kind of neat. They're kind of creepy, but they're kind of neat. And I say creepy, bringing back up that our ancestors are always with us. They tell us that if we go to certain plantations, if you go to certain, up in Detroit, so many slaves funneled through this one specific church in Detroit. It is a very well-known Underground Railroad stop, and it was like the literal last stop before freedom. And so because so many of them did, they will warn all black people that walk through this church for this tour, if your ancestors went through here, and enough of them went through here, you can pick up their residual anxiety. My mom said she stepped in, about had an anxiety attack, and had to back out. That anxiety of because you're so close. This would be you're at the 5-yard line. This would be the worst place. So this is probably where you probably didn't sleep as much, where you didn't eat as much. Things like that. The operator. The operator was the person who helped freedom seekers as a conductor or an agent. River Jordan, Ohio River. Some also called it the Mississippi River. Promised Land was Canada. One of the songs that I'm going to sing in a moment talks about the Promised Land. It's all in code. So I'm going to go and sing 3 songs for you. These would have been code songs that would have been sang. These are more solo versions arranged by Harry T. Burleigh. But a lot of these songs don't have people who actually wrote them because they didn't write. They just were passed down. They were oral traditions that were passed down until Harry T. Burleigh, being one of them, there were multiple, he went and wrote a lot of them down as solos so that these songs were not forgotten or lost to time. Because a lot of folks, and I do believe it, the slave song is one of the first true American folk songs. It was songs that were written here in America about what was going on in America. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to talk about. It doesn't have to be. As long as we learn from our mistakes. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. Then we can actually sit back and enjoy these, because folks like Moses Hogan, composers who wrote all of these amazing, amazing tunes, Moses Hogan, most of his songs are slave songs, or were inspired by them. But we listen to them for enjoyment now because we're reminded of all of the things that went into that, where we have come from, where we have grown from. So the first one that I'm going to sing is Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. If someone heard someone singing that song, that was the sign for, if y'all are going, take me with you. Call me. I'm not scared. I'm ready to go. So those, that would have been something to let everyone know. This one's more, you're probably more familiar with. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I heard the song Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home. That meant that we're going to be leaving soon. In some cases, there was like a specific time frame. If you heard this song, that means it's going to be tonight. There was also a blending of quilts, too. They would stitch specific quilt patterns. So if you saw this quilt pattern hanging, that meant we're going to go tonight, or we're going to go tomorrow, or we know Master's going to be gone, or we're going to go on their next lunch break, or whatever. So things like that. I looked over Jordan. We talked about what Jordan was. I looked over Jordan. What did I see coming for to carry me home? A band of angels coming after me. That would be Harriet Tubman or any other conductors that were coming back down from the north to help. The second verse of this song, if you get to heaven before I do, coming for to carry me home, tell all my friends I'm coming too. So if you happen to get there, I'm coming. Don't second guess it. If I didn't come, trust me, I tried. The third verse, sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down, coming for to carry me home, but still I know I'm heavenly bound. That no matter what my mental state is, sometimes I'm having a good day. Sometimes I cannot get through it as well. But coming for to carry me home. I want to get home. This is the last one I'm going to play for you. It's Deep River. I did this whole song during All Saints when we had our slideshow. After everything else we've talked about, I'm pretty sure you can understand exactly what that song is about. The spirituals, not only did they provide literal guidance, but they provided spiritual guidance. There was a specific reason, because they could have sang about anything. If they're talking in code, they could have sang literally about anything, and it probably would have been less obvious, thinking back on it, if they would have made up a foreign language and said that we were speaking. But I think also part of it was there were certain parts of Christianity that were bent and twisted for mental manipulation for the slave. It's not that they took the Bible and read it wrong, they just chose to interpret it how they wanted to interpret it. And so when they reading a scripture about a slave to the Pharaoh, but if I don't include the Pharaoh part in that, and I don't include what comes after that, and I just read the part to where the literal verse to where it says, "And the slave shall serve his master," those kinds of things really, if you don't know and you don't understand, but when you have such a strong presence and you know that through everything God will always be with you, those kinds of things help. Those kinds of things make it worthwhile. So personally, a water pipe burst in my apartment earlier this week, and it's been just crappy. I saw a shooting star last night. It was the coolest. It was so bright, and I promise you, as I stand here in church and tell you the truth, the first thing that I thought of, with as many blessings or wishes or whatever I could have asked for myself, I said, I just want the world to go like to be a calm place. I just wish the world could be a calm place. And it's that kind of mentality, that kind of, just because I'm going through it doesn't mean that someone else may not be going through something worse. Doesn't mean that I may not be going through something, but I am one person and God died for all of our sins, not just mine. Jesus led himself to the cross to hang his head. He said, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing, even in his final moments before he took his last breath. And if Jesus can portray that much forgiveness, in that moment, the African Americans thought, well, this is nothing. We can support each other, we can love each other, we can, fight. That doesn't mean, just because we are choosing forgiveness doesn't mean that we have to bring ourselves down. We can still continue to grow and still continue to strive. And so once the slave songs, which there are lots more, but they migrated into kind of like Baptist music, lots of blues, lots of jazz. And I'm going to play one more for you. It became a lot of Baptist songs, especially like older Baptists, not today, but a lot of older Baptist songs, there were not a lot of words to them. There were not a lot of words to them because it wasn't about the words, it was about the meaning and the prayer behind it. This is one of my favorite ones that we would do. So we didn't do communion every Sunday at church growing up. We only did it on first Sunday. We would do baptisms before church, and then we would do communion after church. The thing that I think was cool, and because I've gotten the blessed opportunity to play for several different churches, they're all the same. There's so much similarity. It just is how ritualistic do you want to be and what do you want to be ritualistic about. But for the most part, they are all the exact same. We would do our communion. They would turn all the lights out in the church. There was like these big stained glass windows though, so it really didn't get dark. Although the few nighttime services that had happened, it was really cool because there was just one light over there would be they would move out an altar. It would be covered in white. There was one light over it. The mothers or the elders of the church, the elder women of the church, were the only ones allowed to touch the white cloth. The deacons were the only ones allowed to touch the altar. It still takes, like the pulpit, it still takes me forever because when I was a kid, you were not allowed into the pulpit unless you were an actual minister, like you were an actual called minister. And so we would go to do this, and the pastor, he would go off. This would be at the end of first service, Sunday service. He'd go off and he'd put on this long, beautiful white ceremonial robe, and then would put white gloves on, and they all put white gloves on, and they would do a prayer in the back. So while all of that happened, that took a little time to do. We would just sit there and every single first Sunday have a hymn sing. We'd sing, the blood that Jesus shed way back in Calvary, the blood that gives me strength from day to day, it will never lose its power. It reaches to the highest mountain, and it flows to the lowest valley. The blood that gives me strength from day to day, it will never lose its power. But this is one of my favorites we would sing. And this is from the times of kind of think post-slavery, indentured servitude is when they started to first find this song. But this would have been what they would have prayed during Easter. And there's not many words to it. Calvary, Calvary. I think for me the biggest takeaway from the slave song, the Negro spiritual, really any folk song, it's not about the words. The words are a poem. The poem might be really nice, but for me the music is never about the words, and it's crazy because I'm a singer first. It's never about the words, it's about the music. It's about the scripture in which we choose to pray in music. So I challenge you, in whatever music touches you, how does that music really touch you and infect you with love? What is the impression that it makes upon you? I think my favorite part about being a music director for church is that the running joke is, you know the difference between a music director and God, right? God knows he's not a music director. God knows. The running joke is the difference between a music director and God. God knows he's not a music director. One of my favorite things is that every single week I get to sit here and I get to play my music and I get to inspire all of you. Maybe you had a bad week and maybe you hear something that just, I don't know, puts a little extra pep in your step, and it's like, you know what, I can make it just one more week. I can just make it till tonight, till the game, and then I'll be okay. You know? Or sometimes it's like maybe you were already in a great mood. Maybe you were already in a great mood, and so you hear the song differently because the song's not ministering to you in a way that you need to be pulled up and you need to be saved from it. Maybe you're singing it on the rejoice side, on the joyful side. There were a few hymns that were kind of like upbeat and joyful too. And it's funny because the one that I can think of, the words aren't. God is going to set this world on fire. Yes, yes, yes. God is going to set this world on fire one of these days. Hallelujah. God is going to set this world on fire. That is really a hymn. It's called God's going to set this world on fire. I'm going to eat and never get hungry. Yes, yes, yes. But it's not about the words. It's about what are we singing about? What are we feeling? And it is scientifically proven that when you get a group of people together singing, our brain waves match. They sync up. They sync up. And so if I can be a little bit of the leader of that band, the conductor of that rail train, I'll do it every single time. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I think Pastor Eric has something.
So the first thing I want to say is, for many people, the first thing to think about the Lutheran Church is they think of it as a very cultural church. And it depends very much on what church you grew up in, because my home congregation, very culturally German. One of their pastors got in trouble with the church council for saying that they should have some services in English for people in the neighborhood. That was in like 1925. I'm not making that up. And a lot of people think, oh, you know, Lutherans, we're all Nordic and whatever. If you open up to page 1189 in the very back of your hymnal, says sources for music and hymns, you're going to see a whole gaggle that say African American spiritual in there. So just by virtue of being in the United States and being around lots of other kinds of people, there's been some cross-pollination there. You know, every Sunday after Christmas, we sing Go Tell It on the Mountain, spiritual. Every Good Friday, we sing Were You There, spiritual. So these are, you know, Christmas, Easter, these are big days when this happens. So the reach of the spiritual is pretty far. I also wanted to throw out there that the idea of kind of having a thing that is in code and maybe the same words carrying more than one message at once is definitely something we talk about somewhat regularly in Bible study. There are things all through the Bible where people will say, you know, this was written during a time of oppression, so they couldn't come right out and say X, Y, or Z. And with several books we've read and we say, oh, well, this was written long after the event, so maybe the words Moses spoke meant one thing when he spoke them. Maybe they mean something else now when we read them out of the book, and maybe they mean something else even to us as we read it today. So that tradition of having layers of meaning in one sacred text, that goes back at least as far as Scripture. So I just wanted to throw those couple of things out there just to add a couple of other touch points.